freedomslips.com, we present our goddess spiritual warrior, Kathy Bilski.
I command. I call to the architect of the universe's divine creators and ask for permission to quantum leave the world in all life forms on all planes and dimensions, seen and unseen, connected with planet Earth, to let us go beyond our known potential into the greatest unknown golden age the universes and worlds and all planets have ever experienced.
Kathy teaches the spiritual truth so that you may create a better life and be able to make positive changes for yourself and for the planet. She helps us remember that we are not powerless, but very creative spiritual beings having an Earth experience. Time to quantum leap into the age of divine enlightenment and let Kathy provide you with the tools of knowledge you need to awaken spiritually. That's the Quantum Leap Show. Let Light Unite every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern on Revolution Radio, Studio B.
Hi, this is the voice known as Tammy Pepperman. Have you ever thought about how this seems like a farm? The food comes with daily recommended allowance, just like any other farm animal. If you get out of line, you get prodded, slapped, or killed if you're too much liability. And if you are not earning your keep, you can find yourself in prison for non-payment of taxes or child support. If you're tired of being farm product, join us every Thursday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Studio B and Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m. on Studio B, right here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good afternoon. This is Debbie West, and this is Lost Knowledge. Today we have a very exciting guest. We have Michael Cremo, and he is the author of Forbidden Archaeology. It was first released in 1993. It's now in over 20 languages. It's a huge document. I think it's over 800 pages of suppressed archaeological reports of proof that people like ourselves existed on Earth millions of years ago. Until recently, the scientific establishment ignored most of these findings because they contradicted the dominant views of human origins. But this is all starting to change now as we start to unfold and discover the truth of our origin on the planet. And Michael Cremo is he's a member of the World Archaeological Congress and the European Association of Archaeologists. Again, he co-authored Forbidden Archaeology with Richard Thompson. Since 1993, he's presented these findings worldwide at leading scientific institutions such as the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences, and universities from Germany to India, and most recently even at Stanford, Northwestern, University of Illinois, and others here in the United States. We are just now coming of age to a point in our history where our scientific community, along with the growing number of the incarnating species in the fifth root race, is driving us towards this new age of information and our understanding that we do have misinformation about our true origins. So, Michael Cremo, welcome again to Lost Knowledge. We're really excited to have you today and to talk about some of your latest works and accomplishments.
Thank you, Debbie. Good to be with you and all your listeners.
I also want to mention my co-host, Michael Hathaway, who's on the call as well. And Michael, hello.
Hi, Deb, and hi, Michael.
You remember?
Hi, Michael.
Yeah, my two Michaels. You remember talking to Michael Cremo from before, I'm sure.
I sure do. Welcome back.
So, Michael, I want to start really basic here. We're pretty convinced, and I think the world is starting to join in on that, that the history that we have recorded of mankind is wrong, and that there is a much broader history out there that we're starting to uncover. in your findings and in your research and everything that you've done, what, in very short form, what would you say is the more accurate history of the human race?
Well, today, most scientists believe that the first human beings like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. And before that, they would say there were no humans like us anywhere on Earth or anywhere in the universe, and there were only more primitive ape-like human ancestors. But different ancient wisdom traditions, like the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which I'm very familiar with, give a different account. They tell us humans have existed on Earth for many millions of years, going all the way back to the very beginnings of the history of life. And it becomes a question then, well, is there any evidence for that? And if you really look, not in today's textbooks, but if you look back into the original scientific reports of archaeologists, geologists, other earth scientists, you'll see there are many discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints going back much further in time than 200,000 years, going back many millions of years, tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years. So that means we need new explanations for human origins. If humans existed so far in the past, then the current theories of how we came into existence really don't apply anymore. So ultimately, I think we're beings of pure consciousness who have somehow or other come to this level of reality, not fairly recently, but in the very, very distant past, and we're on a journey back to our original home, you could say, which is what I call the level of pure consciousness.
So the documents that you found and that you produced in the book Forbidden Archaeology portrays that mankind also predates, the civilizations that we know of from just a few 100,000 years ago and dates back millions of years. Were these reports found all over the world in many different languages and from many different cultures and many different countries? And were they from accredited institutions? I mean, are they believable?
Very good question. The reports I've documented in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, come from the professional scientific literature for the most part. They are reports by geologists, archaeologists, anthropologists, paleontologists, and other scientists who have dug into the earth. And what is very surprising is that many of them in their work have encountered human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints going back many millions of years. And in my research, I did not look just at reports in English. I looked in reports in many different languages. I have a reading knowledge of most of the European languages like German, Italian, French, Spanish, and so on. So I actually did 8 years of research looking through all the archaeological reports in all these different languages from the time of Darwin up to the present. So they're very credible reports. And in addition to looking at the archival reports, I've also visited museum collections around the world. These things generally are not displayed to the public, but they are there in the museum collections. And I've also visited the sites where these objects and human bones and human footprints have been discovered. So although my primary research was archival, digging out these scientific reports of archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. It also involves actually tracking down the artifacts and the places where they were discovered. But they do come from all over the world. They come from North America, South America, Asia, Africa. They come from all different parts of the world, and the discoveries began in the 19th century, and they've continued up to the present day.
So you've probably been asked this before, but how is it possible to suppress all of this evidence from the public and keep it out of our textbooks? Because you say that it's not it's not being suppressed from the primary data, but in the secondary data, like our textbooks, it doesn't exist. How is that possible?
Well, I believe it's because of a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. And this is something that historians of science and philosophers of science have understood for a long time. Theoretical preconceptions can influence how scientists will react to different kinds of evidence that come to their attention. If the evidence conforms to the dominant theory of the day, it will pass through this intellectual filter very easily, which means it will be included in textbooks, it will be put on display in museums. But if you've got evidence that radically contradicts a dominant consensus, then it tends to be filtered out. It can be forgotten, it can be just set aside, it can be, in some cases, actively suppressed. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Just on a personal level, it's just part of our human psychology. For example, if I love someone and someone tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it. I may even become a little bit angry at the person who tells me such things. So scientists are very much in love with their theories, with their professions, and if they hear something that radically contradicts a theory that they deeply love and are deeply invested in, they tend to react. And another reason I think that this process goes on is that the supporters of the dominant theories have a government-enforced monopoly in the education systems. In other words, they're manifesting a type of power. There are various kinds of power in the world. There's military power, there's political power, there's economic power. There's also intellectual power, which is a very real power. And we see that those who possess power, especially monopoly power, don't like to give it up very easily. So for the past century and a half, the supporters of the now dominant theories of human origins have had a government-enforced monopoly in the education system, and it's not surprising that they want to keep it, which means keeping alternative views and the evidence that supports these alternative views out of the curriculum. And that has the effect of delegitimizing this evidence and these alternative views in the minds of students who are going through these education systems to become the next generation of scientists. And then I think there's a still deeper reason, and that's because most of the alternatives to the current theories tend to have a what we might call a spiritual element to them. They involve generally some sort of non-material aspect, like consciousness as something that can exist apart from matter, or the action of higher intelligence in producing some of the order and complexity that we observe around us. And these things are very much forbidden in the modern scientific establishment. They don't want to have anything to do with non-material substances. They don't want to have anything to do with the idea that some higher cosmic intelligence has something to do with our presence here. So therefore they try to hold the line very strongly so as not to let any of these alternatives get even a slight foothold in the education system and the scientific institutions. Of course, these ideas can circulate on the internet, on the web, and through different media. They haven't managed to suppress all free expression of ideas in all the media, although some segments of the media are very much under their control. But
so let's talk about the media for a second. In 1996, NBC aired a broadcast called "The Mysterious Origins of Man." I think Bill Coate was the director, and they used a lot of the evidential documentation that you produced in the book Forbidden Archaeology. That particular release had a lot of controversy. They tried to suppress it using the FCC and denying the producer access to certain artifacts and so on. What sort of did you find out during that process of the release of the Mysterious Origins of Man? And so moving forward now into the present day, we're not seeing these types of films being released at all, and has that suppression now taken place?
Well, let me say a few things about that. In 1996, there were fewer media outlets. There were the 4 major networks and PBS. Cable television was there, but it wasn't really developed to the extent it is today, with hundreds of different channels of various types of programming. So there were only a few channels for information to get out to the public through the medium of television, and scientists were very much interested in controlling them. They were very shocked when they learned that NBC was going to broadcast this documentary, The Mysterious Origins of Man, which included, as you were mentioning, some of the research from my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and the work of others in the alternative history field, like John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, and their research about Egyptian civilization and how it's older than most scientists now think, and so on and so forth. So actually, scientists made an organized attempt to keep NBC from showing that documentary, and when they weren't successful, they, as you mentioned, went to the Federal Communications Commission and tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, censure NBC, force NBC to apologize for having shown the program, and they also wanted the FCC to fine NBC millions of dollars so that they would never do anything.
So to be clear, this was a group of scientists who were...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and in my book, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact, I've documented the emails that were exchanged by these scientists, the letters that they sent to the FCC, and their attempts to organize boycotts of NBC and so on and so forth. That's all documented in my book, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. But I think things have changed a little bit. There are now so many channels on cable television and digital streaming and broadcast. There's so many different channels that it's become a little bit harder for them to try to control. For example, over the past few years, I've appeared on a series that aired on the History Channel called Ancient Aliens, which I think if something like that had been proposed 20 years ago, for broadcast on a major network, there would have been a huge outcry from the scientific community, and they probably would have made similar attempts to involve the FCC to get this kind of thing stopped. But I think they've more or less realized that they can't control all the media outlets. It's not really possible. So I think they still have influence over some of them.
So I think also collectively as a consciousness, our society, our group soul or whatever you want to call it, is actually coming to the state of evolution where we want to know who we are. It's like it's like we're the adopted stepchild, and we're saying, hey, you know what? We can handle the truth. We want to know. Go ahead and tell us, where did we come from? What's the truth of our origin, and what's the truth of our place in the cosmos? It makes sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about that for 1 second. The findings clearly show, and they're corroborated by many other researchers, some of them who you just mentioned, and many, many more, that we did not evolve from apes, as Darwin proposed, and I think he even knew that wasn't accurate at the time. But there is a theory about aquatic apes. Have you run into that at all, and have you found any research that talks about that?
I'm familiar with the concept. I have to confess I haven't really looked deeply into it. From my point of view, just the whole idea that one complex life form can morph into another complex life form just by some process of evolution. To me, that idea really doesn't hold water, doesn't really seem to me very credible. My ideas are basically influenced by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and the key concept there is that the conscious self is non-material and it's different than the body. The body is just a vehicle for a conscious self that has descended into the world of matter from some higher level of reality. And when the conscious self descends into the level of matter, it needs a vehicle in which to function on this level of reality. Just like, say, as human beings, we normally walk around on the land. If we want to exist in the water, then we need a vehicle that will allow us to function there, like a submarine or a diving suit or something like that. So similarly, when the conscious self comes to the world of matter, it needs vehicles in which to function here. And those vehicles are what we call bodies. And I think there's a whole spectrum of types of vehicles that have been manifested by higher intelligence for conscious selves to inhabit excuse me, on this level of reality. And the reason is, it's sort of like an automobile manufacturing company. It makes a whole range of automobiles because it understands that people have first of all, different needs for different kinds of vehicles. Somebody might need an off-road, four-wheel drive type of Jeep or vehicle like that, or somebody might need a sports car, or somebody might need a family transportation vehicle. So understanding all the different needs of the customers, the manufacturer makes a whole range of vehicles. And according to their needs and their desires, customers get certain types of vehicles. So similarly, I think there's a higher cosmic intelligence that is aware that if conscious selves come to the world of matter, then according to their desires and their inclinations, they are going to require different types of vehicles that will enable them to act out their desires on this level of reality. So there may be plant vehicles, animal vehicles, insect vehicles, fish vehicles. There are lots of different types of vehicles. And according to its level of awareness, a conscious self is put into a particular type of vehicle for a temporary period of time. Just like we see we're in a human body, but that human body isn't going to last forever. At a certain point, it's going to die. And then the conscious self goes to another vehicle. So I think there can be an evolution of conscious selves through different types of vehicles. In one lifetime, the conscious self may be in an aquatic vehicle. In its next life, it may be in a terrestrial vehicle. In its next life, it may be in a vehicle that can fly around in the sky. So there can be an evolution of the conscious self through different types of vehicles, but I don't think the vehicles themselves evolve one into the other.
Michael, do you think there's a link or a common communication between these different vehicles, different life forms that could be connected together?
Yes, I do see they have something in common. The conscious self that enters these different bodily vehicles is the same. In other words, the conscious self that is in the body of, say, an insect is of the same nature as the conscious self that is in the body of a human being. It's just that the vehicle enables or constrains the ability of the conscious self to express itself. Say, just like I'm a person, I can ride different kinds of vehicles. I can ride a skateboard, I can ride a bicycle, I can ride a motorbike, I can ride a car, I can ride in an airplane, I can ride in a boat, I can ride in a submarine, I can ride in a spaceship. I'm the same person, but according to the kind of vehicle I'm in, I'm limited. So in the same way, conscious selves can be limited by the kind of body they've got, but really they're all of the same nature. And I think as conscious selves, they have the ability to communicate in ways that aren't really recognized or understood by modern science. I think there are varieties of kinds of telepathic communications, which could involve telepathic communications among conscious selves and human bodies, but it could also be interspecies communication as well. And if you look at the accounts given by shamans and mystics in various cultures, they talk about that ability to communicate in a cross-species or interspecies sort of way.
So you talk about a lot about the Vedic text and like the teachings that they give out interestingly enough, they talk about over 400,000 different human-like races that live on various planets. And they also mention, and I think this is in the Puranas, it might be called, they also mention that the humans are the least powerful of all of these 400,000 types of beings. It sounds like this is similar to what you're talking about with the conscious self entering these different vehicles. Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yes, I was, in my previous remarks, just speaking about the normal types of bodily vehicles we observe on Earth. Plant vehicles, animal vehicles, human vehicles, or bodies, if we want to use that term. But in addition to that, we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And as you mentioned, the Puranas, the cosmological writings of ancient India, do speak of 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the cosmos. And some of them exist on other dimensions of reality. I think we exist in a multi-level cosmos. And this is reflected in the constitution of a human being. I think really we're made of three things: matter, mind, and consciousness. Matter, the chemical elements, there's a subtle mind element associated with the human vehicle that has some very unusual powers. Some might call them paranormal powers. And then there's the actual self, the conscious self, which is totally non-material. So we're made of matter, mind, and consciousness on this level of reality. And that suggests there are different levels of the cosmos. There's a level of the cosmos dominated by ordinary matter, which is where we find ourselves now. It's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there. But beyond that, there's a more subtle realm of the cosmos, dominated by subtle and mental energies, And it's inhabited by beings adapted to the conditions there. And people may have different names for these kinds of beings. They may call them extraterrestrials or extra-dimensionals or angels or devas or jinn or manitou or, there's so many different names for them in various cultures and philosophies. And then beyond that, I think there's the level of pure consciousness. So we're ultimately part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And it may seem quite unusual to talk about this in a scientific context, but there have been a few scientists, part of the modern intellectual establishment, who have stumbled upon this idea. One of them was Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University Medical School. He came into contact with some people who were reporting what are called alien abduction events. They had undergone experiences where they felt they had been kidnapped or abducted or taken away by extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. And he was wondering, well, are these people psychotic? Are they neurotic? So he did a psychiatric study, and he found that they weren't psychotic, they weren't neurotic, they were, if anything, displaying signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, as, say, when a person involved in a battle or a huge natural disaster will display symptoms like that. So he concluded that they were giving real accounts, and what it indicated to him, as he said in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, it appears ever more likely that we exist in a multi-level cosmos, and the cosmos is filled with all kinds of beings, intelligences, spirits, gods. So when his colleagues at Harvard University found him writing and saying things like that, they were very upset with him. They were saying, we can't have a Harvard University professor saying stuff like that. So they convened an academic court to try to get him removed from his position. They weren't successful. He defended himself and kept on with his position. And shortly after that, I met him in England. We were both speaking at a crop circle conference in Glastonbury, England. And he came to my talk, I came to his, and afterwards we met and were agreeing to stay in touch with each other. But shortly thereafter, he died in a mysterious automobile accident in England. But the point is that we are part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, and according to the ancient Sanskrit writings, there are 400,000 human-like forms of various, and as you were mentioning, humans of our type, terrestrial humans, are at the low end of the spectrum in terms of our abilities.
Yeah, so they mention there that the humans are the least powerful and that these other beings perhaps can travel through space and time, entering and exiting into dimensions. And I think that Dr. Mack's work also discussed the fact that that some of these experiences were not occurring within the physical space-time dimension of the universe the way we comprehend it. Can you talk a little bit about space-time, because that is a very tricky area, and I think it's part of what we need to unravel as far as our understanding of physics and knowledge of the cosmos, is that time is only linear on Earth or something like that, right?
Well, ultimately, I believe time is cyclical. Time is going through vast cycles, and it operates in different ways on different levels of the cosmos. It was an insight that Einstein also had, that time is relative, and time as we experience it on Earth may be going at a different rate than a person who is traveling at or just close to the speed of light may be experiencing time. And there's some interesting accounts in the Puranas that relate to this concept of time being relative. There's the account of King Kakudmi. He was a king existing on this earth many millions of years ago, according to the Puranas, and he had a daughter named Revati. So they were thinking, father and daughter, who would be the best husband for Revati. And they were thinking maybe this king or maybe that king or this prince or that prince. They couldn't figure it out. So they thought, let's go to the highest dimension of material reality, Brahmaloka, and talk to Brahma, who is in charge there, because he would probably be able to tell us who would be the best mate from the karmic point of view. So they traveled from the earth up to that level of reality, Brahmaloka, and they asked to see Brahma. And they were told, well, he's busy right now, but he'll be with you in just a few moments. So after a few moments, Brahma appears and asks what they want. So they explain, they were thinking of possible husbands for Revati. And they named different kings and princes, and Brahma started laughing. And they said, well, what's so humorous? He says, well, in the time you've been up here, millions of years have passed on Earth. And everybody that you're talking about is long gone. But when you go back, there'll be a certain personality there, and he'll he'll be the ideal companion for Revati. So they went back down, they met this personality, and Revati married him. So, but what's interesting is that time is relative. And also, I think the proper analogy or metaphor for understanding our position as conscious beings in this universe, which is only one of many millions of universes according to the Vedic cosmology, is something like the worlds that are created in virtual reality systems or computer gaming realities and things like that. We've been put into a universe, and we've been put into different vehicles on different planets in order to get certain kinds of experiences. But ultimately, we have an existence that goes beyond the little virtual reality systems that we've been placed into. It's as if we've forgotten our real lives and we've just become absorbed in the space-time, the artificial space-time realities that have been manufactured for us. So, according to the Vedic cosmology, the most important purpose of human life is to wake up from the dreamlike existence in this material world and come to the waking level of understanding.
I did a book on that, on simplifying your soul's code a few years ago, and I agree with that we've complicated it so much that we just really missed the true meaning. Yeah, we've become distracted from that purpose. And I think that's deliberate, because I think there are certain powers in society that want to see conscious selves forgetful of their original nature and totally absorbed in producing and consuming more and more material things in competition with each other. We're told by most scientists today, if we ask the question, what are we? They'll say, you're a machine made of molecules. You're a machine made of matter. And not only that, we're told we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival, individually and collectively. So that conception of who we are is very materialistic. So it's not any surprise that our goals and values and aspirations have become extremely materialistic. And this process of the overproduction and overconsumption of material things is very destructive towards our environment, and it also generates huge levels of conflict on all levels of human society. But it also keeps conscious selves from realizing their original nature. If conscious selves realize their original nature, that we're all beings of pure consciousness, we have needs that transcend material production and consumption. We are not different from each other, and we shouldn't be dividing ourselves into so many competing groups and fighting for the control of material resources. If that kind of mentality were being promoted in our education system, then people would put less time and energy into overproducing and overconsuming material things. They would figure out ways to satisfy their material needs in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible while putting most of their human energy into developing the resource of consciousness. And instead of striving towards competition and division, they'd be looking more towards unity and cooperation. And that would be bad for certain interests, because if people can be kept in the darkness and kept working hard to produce and consume more and more material things, that generates wealth and power that flow in an unequal way into the pockets of various groups in society. And the ones that are benefiting from their domination of this whole system want to see it keep going.
So, I'm sorry, let me ask real quick. On this cyclical time, the way time goes in cycles, we've talked a little bit on this show about the time period of Lemuria and Atlantis. And there's been, some people have said that this is sort of a repeat of that particular time cycle right now, as we're trying to understand and grasp our spiritual nature and fight against, the tendency to use science and technology for manipulation and a warfare paradigm that's sort of been established right now. Do you see any parallels between, what's happening on the surface right now and what happened during the times of Atlantis? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it all depends upon what we mean by Atlantis. Some people mean the island that was...
Yeah, no, I mean the hundreds of thousands of years that civilization, existed and thrived, even from the time that before, when the Lemurians weren't actually, in body, all the way through till the destruction. So I don't know how long it lasted, but it seemed like it was a pretty long time.
Yeah, well, I think there are parallels. As I say, most of my insight about these things is drawn from my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which don't directly speak about these other cultures, but I see them. There are parallels. For example, the Vedic teachings say that there was once a worldwide human civilization based on spiritual principles, and that with the beginning of the present age of Kali, which is an age of ever-increasing environmental and social disturbance, that original culture was lost. It began to break up. And so there may be parallels in the accounts of other wisdom traditions that have to do with Atlantis and Lemuria. But I think there are parallels between the Vedic accounts and the accounts that we see coming from
I think, language might get in the way. Our use of language can get in the way. But in the Vedic text, do they talk about the destruction of the civilization based on their, need to develop, scientific and technology and expand in that manner, as opposed to expanding in the spiritual sense?
Yes, but it's in the context that there are in this world that we live in now, on the level of matter, there are always two types of conscious selves. There's one type of conscious self that is trying to get deeper and deeper into the exploitation and domination and control of material resources and other conscious selves, and it gets more and more involved in conflict and competition and all of that, and division. And then another type of conscious self is striving to understand, I am a being of pure consciousness, ultimately from some higher level of reality, and all others are beings of pure consciousness, and we're meant to exist in harmony with each other, and we're meant to be trying to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, and efficient way possible, and putting most of our human energy into contemplation, meditation, yoga, higher, elevating consciousness, in other words. So in different phases of the cyclical course of time, there are different balances, between those two types. At some points in the cycle, those who are into harmony and consciousness and spirituality are more dominant. And then with the passage of time, this other group becomes more dominant. And then so that basic model is there, and I can see it's reflected in a lot of different wisdom traditions and their accounts of the history of the earth. We're now in a time that is more favorable to those who are into the domination, exploitation, and control of matter, and who are into division and conflict. The forces of time are now more favorable to that group, and therefore we see they're largely in control of society, and those who are on the other end of the spectrum have been to some extent marginalized in terms of the dominant power structures in the world. So, but that will change ultimately.
How do you see the changes taking place?
Well, even if it's going to rain, it doesn't mean you have to get wet. So even though the trend of the age is very materialistic, individual conscious selves can choose to orient their lives based on other principles, even if it means going against the trend. Sometimes it's nice to go along with the flow, especially if the flow is leading in a good direction, but sometimes you have to go against the trend, which can be difficult, but you can shelter yourself, you can shelter others, and make alternative realities to the extent that you're able to do it. So I think that can happen. And even, actually, there are some predictions in the ancient Sanskrit writings that even though we are now in a dark age, there can be a golden age within that dark age, for the next 10,000 years or so. So I think that possibility is there, that society can actually be transformed, even though the general trend in society today is towards more materialism, domination, control, exploitation, and conflict.
So, Michael, can we bring this back to the concept that human beings, or conscious beings of some sort existed on this planet Earth, the planet we're on, for millions of years? How, and they've left remnants now that we can, artifacts and bones and structures and things where we can identify that they were here and serve some sort of purpose during that period. How can we, what are we learning from the fact that, that we've been on the Earth for millions of years as conscious beings?
Well, it's a good question, because in one sense, someone could say, well, what difference does it make if we've been here for 200,000 years, as most scientists now believe, or whether we've been here for millions and millions of years? What difference does it really make? And the difference it makes is if we have been here for many millions of years, going all the way back to hundreds of millions of years ago, then it means that the current materialistic scientific explanations for our origins really don't work. It means we need new explanations that go beyond, the Darwinian theories of evolution that are now dominant in the world's education systems. And that means looking at totally different explanations. And that's important because the way that we define ourselves determines our goals, our values, our objectives. The current theories of human origins are extremely materialistic, and that means if we adopt them, then we get a very materialistic sense of identity. So the fact that there's all this evidence that contradicts the now dominant theories of human origins means that we have to come up with a new sense of self, a new sense of identity, new answers to the questions, who are we and where did we come from?
That's an awesome explanation. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be right back with Michael Cremo and talk about who we are as a species and where we're headed, and learn more about the forbidden archaeology that has been suppressed for so many years. Be right back. Welcome to Lost Knowledge. This is your host, Debbie West, and I have co-host Michael Hathaway on as well. We are talking to Michael Cremo, who is one of who's the premier author of Forbidden Archaeology, which, when released in 1993, basically turned the scientific and archaeological and history communities upside down by proving scientifically with evidential information that the history of man's origins on this planet date back millions of years, and that this hidden history of the human race has been suppressed through our scientific and academic institutions. Michael, some of the controversial findings that you came up with from the book Forbidden Archaeology are quite astounding. I'm going to mention just a couple of them. One of the things that came out of that work was that there is such an abundance of evidence against human evolution that has been ignored, and that scientists cheat on a massive scale. Further, that human beings were around before the dinosaurs, that these signs of civilization have been found that are millions of years old, and that all of our textbooks are inaccurate. Those are astounding statements. So it's not surprising that some of this did turn, create a lot of attention when it was brought out. Do you still stand behind all of those findings, and can you talk a little bit about how you support those that position?
Well, yes, I do stand behind the findings, and they are controversial, and there is a lot of opposition to it. That's why I called the topic Forbidden Archaeology. I speak in a lot of different forums. Sometimes I'm speaking to scientific audiences, and sometimes I'm speaking to university audiences, and sometimes I'm speaking to alternative types of organizations. Just over the weekend, I was in the Las Vegas area, and I went out to a little gathering called 0 Point out in outside of Las Vegas. We're a small group of alternative types of people. We're having a little event, and I spoke there in a little tent to a small audience. But sometimes I'm speaking at international scientific conferences, and sometimes at other types of organizations. For example, a couple of months ago, I gave a talk on Forbidden Archaeology at Google headquarters in Mountain View, California. They have a nice program where employees can invite authors to come and present their ideas at Google headquarters. So some employees invited me to make a presentation there, and I did. Some of the other employees there didn't like very much the idea that I was going to be speaking there, so there was some opposition, but the lecture did go on as was scheduled. And sometimes when I'm speaking at universities, that happens also. A lecture will be scheduled, and then some faculty members will object to the fact that I'm being allowed to speak, and they try to get the lectures canceled and things like that. Stuff like that does happen. If it didn't, I don't think I'd be able to call my topic Forbidden Archaeology. But as far as some of the examples go, I mean, just to give you an idea of how this research works, you have to dig back into the original scientific reports, because you're not going to find this stuff mentioned in today's textbooks. So I was digging back into some scientific reports from the 19th century, and I came across a report by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. And this report was published by Harvard University in the year 1880. And he explained how miners in the California gold mining region had been finding human bones and human artifacts in the gold mining tunnels. And these reports came to his attention, so as a scientist, he was very interested. So he went out to the locations, he conducted his investigations, he collected the artifacts, and he wrote this report about them, which was kind of interesting because the human bones and human artifacts were found in layers of rock many millions of years old. Actually, according to modern geologists, some of the layers of rock in which these objects were found were about 50 million years old. So it's a very interesting report, by a professional scientist, published by Harvard University, documenting discoveries of human artifacts and human bones many, many millions of years old, up to about 50 million years old, which completely contradicts, the modern theories of human origins, which were taking shape around that time in the latter part of the 19th century. Darwin published his book, Origin of Species, in 1859, and after that, scientists started trying to prove the idea that human beings evolved from apes and monkeys fairly recently. So there was a scientist named William Holmes, who was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. He was a supporter of Darwin's ideas. And Whitney was just a scientist reporting what he found, but it contradicted what the emerging Darwinian theory of human evolution had said. So this Dr. Holmes wrote, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he wouldn't have published that report. So as far as Holmes thought, if the facts didn't support the theory of evolution, they should be forgotten. And basically, that's what happened. So somehow or other, I was able to find this report by Dr. Whitney, and from later, I was able to find some of the artifacts that he had collected from the California gold mines. They're in the Museum of Anthropology of the University of California at Berkeley. They're not shown to the public. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum, but I did get permission to see them and photograph them. And I also looked at Dr. Whitney's original maps and field notes and went into the mountains of California to places like Table Mountain, where I was able to relocate some of the old gold mining tunnels where these objects were originally found. So that is an example of what I call forbidden archaeology. And things that don't fit the standard paradigm continue to be found right up to the present day, although most scientists don't recognize these things for what they are, and they try to make the discoveries fit into the standard paradigm. Like just last year, dozens of footprints were found at a place called Happisburgh in England, on the eastern coast of England. Some archaeologists were excavating along the shoreline there, and they uncovered a layer of rock that had dozens of footprints. And they carefully measured these footprints, and they determined they were just like modern human footprints, but they were found in layers of rock almost 1 million years old, and they don't believe that humans like us existed millions of years ago. So they just said, well, obviously they must have belonged to the kind of ape men, that existed at that time. But as far as the footprints themselves were concerned, they were just like modern human footprints. So there are other examples that have come to my attention since my original book was published, and I'm gathering together those for another book I'm going to call More Forbidden Archaeology.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know that James Vieira and some others have gotten a lot of information gathered on large skulls and, in this country, and there's artifacts and findings just seemingly coming up, everywhere at the moment. So, like I said, I think we're kind of waking up to this new knowledge because it's the right, time for us to acknowledge more of who we are and what our history is and what we're here to do. So let's talk a little bit about the similarities between the Sanskrit text, which you're very familiar with, and sort of the modern UFO phenomenon, because right now the media and a lot of the people who are writing books and doing reporting are talking about, the fact that there has been so many sightings of UFOs and so much push towards disclosure of what's the truth about all this information about extraterrestrial beings and crashed spaceships on the planet and historical evidence of what we call Vimanas in ancient times, things like that. What do the Sanskrit texts say about the cosmic world and and these other beings? And is there a parallel between what we kind of see in the modern day UFO reporting and what they're talking about?
Yes, I think there is, and I talked about that in some of my appearances on the series Ancient Aliens. One thing to keep in mind is something I mentioned earlier. According to the Vedic cosmology, we live in a multi-level cosmos where some levels are made of the more dense kinds of material elements, and then some levels are made of the more subtle material elements, and then some of the levels are made of just totally spiritual elements. And according to the Vedic texts, there are vimanas from all the different levels. There are vimanas made of spiritual elements, there are vimanas made of subtle material elements, and there are vimanas made of gross material elements. And the descriptions of the behavior of these vimanas given in these ancient texts kind of lines up with many of the things that are being reported today. One account from the Vedic text that I find really fascinating is the material vimana that was used to attack the city of Dwarka on this planet. Dwarka is a city that still exists in northwestern India. It's on the coast. But thousands of years ago, it was the capital city of Lord Krishna, who, according to the Vedic text, was a manifestation of God himself. And it was his city that he was ruling in on earth. But there were forces of darkness, and they exist both on the earth and on a cosmic level. So there was a king who, his name was Shalva, and he wanted to attack Krishna's city. And he was part of this alliance of dark forces in the universe, but his position was on Earth. So he approached the engineer of the forces of darkness, who exists on a higher level of the cosmos, and got from him this engineer of the forces of darkness was called Maya Danava. And King Shalva on this earth planet got a flying machine from him. And this was a flying machine made of metal, and it had various weapon systems. And this King Shalva used it to attack the city of Dwarka, started shooting down various kinds of weapons, some of which resembled modern energy beam weapons. And he also had weapons that could weaponize weather. Sometimes we hear about that today, that modern governments actually have technologies that they can use to weaponize tornadoes, cyclones, earthquakes, and things of that sort.
Yeah, well, we know about HARP. We've reported on that. Yeah.
So apparently it's nothing new that they had these abilities in very ancient times.
How long ago was these texts? Where did the Sanskrit texts come from, and what time period were they written?
Well, they date to different periods. The one that's describing this event goes back about 5,000 years. But there are other historical writings that deal with events that took place millions of years ago. This is a fairly recent event, but still, according to modern science, the first mechanical flying machines were invented early in the 20th century or very late in the 19th century. In other words, about between 100 and 200 years ago, the first airplanes were invented. But this ancient Sanskrit text called the Srimad Bhagavatam describes this metal flying ship that was piloted by King Shalva and his soldiers that was raining down energy beam weapons and other kinds of weapons on the city of Dwarka 5,000 years ago. And then there's another interesting element of the description. It's not only a flying machine, but it's described that it could appear simultaneously in different places at the same time. In other words, sometimes it would appear to be in several different places. And this is sort of like modern electronic warfare techniques that are used by modern militaries. You know, for example, they have technologies that will enable, say, an airplane, if it's entering enemy territory, to show false radar images so that the defenders using their radar get confused. It looks like there's several airplanes attacking when there's only one, and they can't really tell which radar image is the real one. So apparently this kind of technology existed thousands of years ago.
So you're saying nothing's changed. We're still the same conscious beings, and we're still playing out the same play.
That's right.
That we've been doing. And so what do we do to change what we're doing? I mean, the process of cosmic evolution has to do with the soul, right? And reaching up to these higher dimensions. Is that part of the process that we're trying to unravel?
That is absolutely what the ultimate solution is. And that's the real purpose of different systems of yoga and meditation and contemplation that you can find in various ancient wisdom traditions. They were meant to uncover the real nature of the self, because now we tend to identify with the temporary material vehicles that we occupy, and we tend to get involved in trying to use these vehicles for the purpose of dominating, controlling, and exploiting material resources and other conscious beings as well. So if we really focused on our real nature, we would understand that we have falsely identified with robot-like vehicles that are not our real selves, and that we have a higher self that is beyond the vehicles made of matter, which are temporary, that we have to enter and re-enter according to our karma, but only temporarily. But we actually do have an original form of pure consciousness. It's called a swarupa. And we're meant to exist in that on some higher level beyond time.
Michael, do you think that your incarnation into your vehicle from your higher being in this lifetime is for a very specific purpose for this transition?
I think that's true of many people, not just myself. I think we all have to discover what our mission of life is. And at a certain point in my life, in this incarnation, I came to understand that my purpose was something different than I originally thought it was. You know, I was raised in a military family, and at one point I thought I was meant to become a member of the military or one of the intelligence services or something like that. And then at a certain point I understood that I don't want to be part of that. I want to be part of something that's meant to truly unite conscious beings on this planet and bring them together rather than continually engaging in conflict. So I think that's an awareness that many people come to, not just myself. But,
was there a particular moment for you?
Well, I think it happened for me in 1973 when I was at a Grateful Dead concert, and I happened to receive a copy of Bhagavad Gita as it is from a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga who was at that concert and gave me that book. And I took it and I read it, and in that book, it's a conversation between Lord Krishna and his disciple Arjuna. And in that book, Arjuna asks Krishna, if I take up the process of self-realization and I don't finish it, what will happen to me? And Krishna said, you will take birth again in this material world, and you will be automatically attracted to the spiritual path when it presents itself to you. And then you will carry on from where you left off. So I think basically that's what I see happen to me. I, in some previous life, had taken up the path of self-realization. I had made a certain amount of progress on that path. And then in this life, when I was presented with the path again at a certain point, it resonated with me, and I was attracted to carry on from where I had left off. And part of self-realization is sharing self-realization with others. It's not just for a selfish purpose. As a matter of fact, if you're just trying to become self-realized for your own personal interests, you'll never really get the ultimate self-realization.
So one of the other things that people often compare ancient texts with and UFOs is this spiritual hierarchy in the cosmos, which includes various confederations of planets, a confederation or hierarchies that operate maybe from these higher dimensions. Have you some thoughts on that? And does the Sanskrit text also talk about that?
Yes, they do. Basically, as I was mentioning before, there are two types of conscious selves within the vast universe that we exist in, this multi-level universe that we exist in.
I'm sorry, when you say conscious self, does that mean soul?
Souls.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes if I use the word soul, the minds of people turn off because they think it's something religious, it's something you have to believe in, there's no evidence for it. So sometimes I prefer to use the term conscious self, because none of us can deny that we are conscious and that we are persons, we are selves. And it's not a question of belief, it's our most direct personal experience. We all experience it. So it's not a matter of faith or belief, it's the most real part of our existence. So sometimes I prefer using the word conscious self to soul because, as I said, many people, they just think a soul, that's no evidence for that. It's just a belief. But I'll use it if people are familiar with it and accept using theological terms. So we could say soul, yeah. There are two kinds of souls, those that are on, you could say, the path of darkness and those that are on the path of light. And that's true both on Earth, and it's true in terms of the whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. So there's always been a struggle on Earth to use society in such a way that either it encourages souls to make progress on the path of self-realization, or other forces try to use it to organize society on Earth so as to encourage people to get deeper and deeper into the darkness of material domination, control, and exploitation. So sometimes beings of light from the higher levels of the cosmos, they specifically take birth on Earth in order to help push things in their direction. And similarly, those souls or conscious selves who are on the path of darkness, they will also take birth on the Earth in order to influence society in the direction they want to see it go. So there's always been that kind of tension. And actually, the Vedic texts like the Mahabharata, they describe a huge war that took place on this planet thousands and thousands of years ago. And it's directly mentioned that souls from these confederations of beings at higher levels in the cosmos were taking birth on Earth specifically in order to take part in influencing how that battle was going to go. So fortunately at that time the forces of goodness won, but this idea that you were mentioning of confederations of beings at higher levels of the cosmos, that is something that I'm aware of and is part of the whole Vedic cosmology.
So when people report back that they see these etheric light beings, whether it's from modern-day ufology or from ancient texts, it's possible then that they are actually seeing something entering into this density from, say, a higher realm or a higher dimension.
Yeah, well, that's the concept of avatar. Avatar is a Sanskrit word. It means one who comes down from a higher level. Of course, there was that film that was out a few years ago that popularized the word, but many people don't probably understand the Sanskrit derivation of that word. But another thing that I always try to keep in mind is that as conscious selves, souls, we're all extraterrestrials. None of us are from this present level of reality. Our existence has its origin in some higher level of reality that is known in Sanskrit as Vaikuntha or Brahman, means the level of pure consciousness or spirit. So ultimately, we're all kind of extraterrestrials. We've all descended from that higher level of reality, but we're meant to return to it. And that's that process of coming down is what I call devolution. As conscious beings, we have not evolved up from matter, as most scientists now believe. Rather, we've come down or devolved, and we find ourselves on this material level of reality now, but our main purpose of human life shouldn't be just to remain here producing and consuming material things, but we should be putting some of our human energy into restoring consciousness to its original pure state.
Wow, Michael, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In vein with that, Michael, I've always had the theory that each person has a frequency that's unique and special within themselves as to how they almost journey out into the cosmos to connect to their soul vibrations.
Yeah, I think that's true. Each each conscious self, according to the spiritual tradition that I follow, has a unique spiritual form called a swarupa, and it has a unique relationship with the source of all conscious beings. And this relationship is called a rasa. And we see that each individual is drawn to a particular type of relationship. Some conscious selves, their main mode of relating is friendship, and some, their main mode of relating is a parental kind of relationship to a child, and some, their mode of relationship is the relationship of lover and beloved. They like that mode most of all. And each conscious self has a particular rasa or relationship on the transcendental level with the source of all conscious beings. And that's what we're really hunting for in this world, because it's not just an intellectual game here. We're looking for emotional satisfaction on some very, very deep level, and it's very difficult to find. It won't really be satisfied until we're established in our original rasa with the source of all conscious beings. Then we'll be able to properly relate to all other conscious beings as well, and experience this loving, harmonious satisfaction that we're all really aspiring for and searching for, maybe for millions and millions of lifetimes, and not finding it.
So where do you find it?
I find it in the techniques of meditation and bhakti yoga that I've been initiated into. But I think it can be found in a lot of, I don't claim to have a monopoly on spiritual truth. I think it can be found in other traditions as well. I think there are, in every religion, as it's called, there's a more exoteric and a more esoteric aspect to it. And the more exoteric aspect can be used to create division and conflict. But on the esoteric level, the level of soul, and trying to understand, the true mystical nature of the soul, there can be a platform of unity. It's like if you're looking for gold you usually don't find in nature in its pure form, but a geologist or a metallurgist can tell us how to extract gold from its ore where it's mixed with less valuable elements. So once you've extracted the pure element gold, then you could stamp it with the symbols of different nations. But if it's really gold, it doesn't matter what symbol that you've stamped on it. So similarly, if by some technique of yoga or meditation or contemplation or prayer or whatever spiritual discipline you're following, you can come to the understanding that I am a being of pure consciousness, all others are beings of pure consciousness. We're all meant to exist in loving harmony with each other and in loving harmony with the source of us all, the source of all conscious beings. If you're able to come to that level of awareness, then it doesn't matter what you call it, what you call the method by which you got there. You could call it Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. The main thing is that you've actually got the result.
So I have a couple more questions. One is, when you talked about the different humanoid races from the Vedic text, they're said to live all together in these parallel universes some of them in higher dimensional realms, on, in, and around the Earth realm, and all cooperate together, even though they have different customs and appearances. That sort of describes much of our current UFO reporting. So,
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is, like, how similar is, it's like we're using different words to say the same thing.
Yes, it is. I mean, sometimes I'm invited to speak at UFO kinds of conferences, and it's one of the points that I make, that in the popular world, people generally think, when they hear extraterrestrial or alien, they think of one thing, the classic gray. But if you actually get into a deep study of all the different types of alien and extraterrestrial beings that have been reported, you'll see that there's a great many of them. And another point that I try to make is that sometimes people try to limit the nature of these extraterrestrial beings, not only to one shape, the classic gray with the big eyes and the bulbous head, but to one physical type, namely some type of flesh and blood, biological organism, very similar to our present terrestrial human bodies. But I would say the extraterrestrial beings, if we look at all the reports that come from the modern UFO alien abduction type of literature, see that there are many different kinds, hundreds or even thousands of kinds, and they are also many different types. Some, yes, flesh and blood types, but some more subtle. And, there's that aspect of it. So if you actually look at all of the reports that come from, the modern UFO alien abduction field of research, it tends to match up with the ideas that we get from various ancient wisdom traditions, namely that we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings, and they're humanoid, they're like us in a sense, but some of them may be of more subtle energies than our terrestrial human bodies.
And then one other question along those same lines. People have reported these UFO instances in modern times in relationship to time, where time seems to disappear. So when they experience this other realm, there's something that distorts their time. Can you sort of explain that? And does that have anything to do with time travel and parallel universes, and how these other cosmic energies are entering into our space-time?
Well, one thing that's reported, by modern UFO alien abduction researchers or contactees is the phenomenon of missing time, where someone might, for example, in one of the classic cases, be driving along a road and then suddenly find themselves somewhere else, and some time has passed that they can't recall, where they were. This sort of thing is also mentioned in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, this phenomenon of missing time. And another thing that may come up is relativity of time. And I was mentioning earlier an account from the ancient Sanskrit writings of India that involved a person from the Earth planet going to some higher level of reality and then returning to Earth and finding that millions of years had passed during the brief absence from the Earth and the brief presence on this higher level of reality. So it seems like there are reports like that also from some of the modern UFO alien abduction types of.
So what's interesting is this past weekend I went to the movie Interstellar, which is, I thought, going to be a sort of spaceship type movie, and the premise of the movie is all about space time and all about people coming back to Earth after traveling to other planets and having experienced this shift in reality, a parallel universe, what they call the fifth dimension. And also, that time had shifted while they're in their absence. So it may be something that's sort of coming of age now in our modern, scientific and realms of thought. So it's very interesting concept.
I haven't seen that particular film.
Very shocking when you watch it.
I think you've kind of inspired me to go maybe have.
Yeah, it definitely goes into different. Into new realms of reality that haven't been explored in the traditional, space movies. So it's really, I found it very exciting, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I guess let's not spoil it for anybody if there's
exactly. Yeah, but
any secrets. But
no,
it does sound interesting.
So one other thing I want to talk about, since while we still have time, is your co-author Richard Thompson. So I think that you two worked together for a number of years in producing that the first the book Forbidden Archaeology, and then he went on to produce some other books of his own. And can you just describe a little bit about Richard Thompson, what it was like to work with him, and how you two kind of worked together and so on?
Yeah, of course he's no longer with us. A few years ago he left this earthly embodiment. But I first met him in 1984. He was on the same spiritual path that I am. And I had been a member of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness for a few years. And I was connected with the publishing activities of that society. And I had been involved in writing some books on yoga and meditation and vegetarianism, spiritual vegetarian diets and things like that. In 1984, I was asked to begin working with Richard Thompson on some scientific writings, giving Vedic perspectives on modern scientific ideas. So our first project was to put together, for popular consumption, a publication called Origins. This was a magazine-style publication. It was 64 pages long. It wasn't a periodical. It was just like a single one-off publication. And in it, we gave Vedic perspectives on the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of consciousness, the origin of our human species. And that was an introduction for me. That experience for me was an introduction to integrating science and spirituality. Whereas before that, I'd been more or less on the strictly spiritual side of things. And he was a very good teacher for that. He had a PhD in mathematics from Cornell University. So then after we came out with that publication, Origins magazine, we decided to turn each part of the magazine into a book. And I was given the archaeology topic to work on. So he told me that the 8 years of work I did in researching and writing Forbidden Archaeology under his guidance was like writing a PhD with a thesis advisor, with me being the PhD candidate and him the thesis advisor. So it was, he was like my mentor in integrating my Vedic spirituality with scientific research. And as I said, I was given the archaeology and human origins topic as my special concentration. So that's why I've concentrated on that work. And he was more focused on Vedic cosmology in particular. He wrote a book called Alien Identities, which was a comparison of the modern UFO alien abduction evidence with the information that's contained in the ancient Sanskrit writings, the Vedic literature. And then he went on to write some books like Mysteries of the Sacred Cosmos, I think is the title of one of his works, about Vedic cosmology, the Vedic conception of the universe as it relates to modern astronomical views of the universe. So, yes, I would say he was like my mentor in integrating Vedic spirituality with scientific research. And I think it was a great loss that a few years ago he left us. But yeah, his books are still there.
I guess silent there for a minute, Michael. What's coming up next?
Well, I've got some things I'm involved in. One thing that's coming up is in June of 2015. I'm a speaker on a spiritual cruise that's going up to Alaska. There are going to be some alternative researchers, healers. I'm going to be there. And I'll be speaking about how the Vedic cosmology relates to Tlingit Indian cosmology, which has some similar ideas. Those are the Indian tribal people who live in that part of the world. So if anybody wants to join me on a cruise to Alaska in June of next year, you could go to spiritualcruise.com and sign up for that. And then in terms of my writing, I'm writing another book called More Forbidden Archaeology. Since Forbidden Archaeology was first published, there's additional information that's come to my attention, updates on some of the old cases, some new cases. So I'm currently researching and writing that book. I also have a bi-monthly column that I write for Atlantis Rising magazine that's called The Forbidden Archaeologist. So if there are any readers of that magazine, Atlantis Rising, they could have a look at my column as it appears in each issue. And next year I'll be traveling to India. I'm always got some lectures coming up or interviews, so listeners could look at my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, if they want to keep up with my upcoming lectures and media interviews.
So, Michael, I also want to mention your book, My Science, My Religion, which was put out in 2012, and it's a collection of 24 papers that have been presented at various academic conferences over the past 18 years. So that's a great book to get some, sort of quick information about what kind of papers he's presented at these worldwide conferences. He's presented at, the World Archaeological Congress, which is every 4 years in a different country. Just before we go, Michael, I want to ask you one more thing. A friend of mine is working really hard to get a treaty signed that will ban space-based weapons that they feel right now is very pertinent to what's happening as far as the evolution right now of mankind here on this planet, and that if we could come together as a race and collectively decide to ban the technology that would produce weaponry in space, that we could sort of have a different destiny on this planet. Is that something that you could support and talk about, this ban to, to launch weapons in space?
It sounds to me, I mean, this is the first I've heard of that particular initiative. It sounds to me like it's something that's worthwhile in pursuing. Aren't there already some treaties about that?
There are. The treaties have been out there for a while, and they're being negotiated right now before the UN. And there's two countries, China and Russia, who have both declared that they will not be the first to launch space-based weapons. So it's a very active dialogue. It's being, the rhetoric is back and forth. Like you say, the need for dominance, control, and manipulation on a nation-state basis is sort of commandeering everything. So if we could all collectively come together and say that this is not the way we want to proceed and this is not our destiny on this planet, that we have other objectives, it would be great. On a spiritual level, if we could come forward and declare our sovereignty as beings, conscious beings or souls or whatever, that no longer want to exist in that paradigm. And that's part of this whole platform of banning the space-based weapons program, is just changing consciousness, I think.
Yeah. So, I thought there were already some treaties about that, but if there's another one coming up, I think it's a good thing.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you know more about that. We are so happy to have had you on the show today. We've covered so much information. This will be archived, and we'll have a YouTube in about a week for everybody to share this information from Michael Cremo, the Forbidden Archaeologist. Thank you, Michael, for being on the show.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael and Debbie.
It's been a great show. Thank you.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message. Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Hi everybody, it's me, The Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, The Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.